Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the Birmingham tournament. So, first of all, a little overview of the tournament itself. So, it had 202 players in total taking part in this tournament, which makes it the third biggest tournament ever organized for Star Wars Limited. I think the biggest one was in Barcelona. Then we had the 222 players in Twickenham in very early stage of the game lives. And this is by far the biggest tournament that we had so far for set 3. And it's also, in my opinion, probably going to be one of the biggest tournaments for set 3 overall. I'd be very surprised if we see bigger tournament for this new set, but we'll see how it goes. It was a 2-day tournament, 8 round of Swiss in day 1 and a top 8 cut for day 2, all in constructed best of 3. It was organized by OPE Organized Play events, so they are one of the main organizers of non-FFG independent tournaments in the UK, and they do an amazing job in my opinion. This was the biggest prize pool of any Star Wars Unlimited tournament ever, because the winner not only gets a case of the set 3 booster boxes, so that's 6 booster boxes, tons of like great promo signed cards, on top of a deck box, game changing deck box, and game changing deck box. Also a playmats, the high ground playmats, which I think is very probably is going to can be sold for a lot of money, and of course, last but not least, a flight tickets for Las Vegas for the Galactic Championship. So yeah, I don't know any tournament that comes even close and giving out this. The flight ticket by itself already costs at least $1,200, $1,300 $1,200 or euros. So I don't know any tournament that has come even close in giving out the same prize. Prize for second place was also very impressive. So yeah, an absolute humongous amount of prize for the winners, which happens to be myself. So if you didn't know, I happened to win this tournament. So this was by far the biggest tournament that I've won for Star Wars Unlimited. And it is also one of my best performances in my trading card game career, but we'll get into further details about this later on. Moving on to the meta overview. So in terms of meta, as you can see, an extremely diverse meta. Anakin was the most represented deck with a 13.93% of the meta game. Then we got Jango Fett, which I was expecting to be the most popular deck, but happens to be only in second place. Then way below Sabine at 6%. I think a lot of the reason why people didn't really bring Sabine for this tournament is probably because the deck struggles a little bit against Jango Fett. So, but it is obviously a very strong deck. So obviously saw a lot of play. Then Cad Bane also saw a lot of play. It was seen as one of the biggest winners of the Boba ban. For myself and many others, and people have basically built that deck in order to. I think the deck struggles a little bit against Django. This is why I was not necessarily gonna see this, but it's very strong against other mid-range deck, and it actually has the highest win percentage of the entire among the decks that saw a significant amount of play. It is the highest win percentage by quite a bit actually. So it's a massive performance. Then we got Yoda saw a lot of play, which I was personally very surprised because the meta is very fast. So it's a bit difficult for Yoda as a leader that deploys late. But I think it's confirming the fact that what I was saying is that I think Yoda is the best 7-cost leader in the game. It is the best late deploy leader in the game. Then we saw Bosk, which was made by a healthy amount of Bosk Blue and Bosk Green. And then we got like Quinlan Han Solo, Audacious Smuggler, only representing 4.48%, so not very represented in this meta. But to be fair, the deck struggles a little bit against aggro, so it's not necessarily a massive surprise, even though the deck has benefited a lot from the Boba ban, of course. And then we got a bunch of mid-range deck, aside some Chancellor, a lot of people just trying out new leaders. We saw Chancellor Palpatine, aside Vantage, even Captain Rex with basically 4 people bringing Captain Rex. Only 4 Kondoku is a bit more surprising. I find Kondoku to be quite a strong leader, but it didn't perform at all. As you can see, for Kondoku, only 25% of the meta. It's very difficult to build good Kondoku decks, so I think Kondoku is very strong, but people are gonna we need to get it cooking a little bit more. Darth Vader also saw a little bit of play, and Luke Skywalker, I was expecting to see a little bit more play. I think Luke Skywalker mid-range has something to say in this particular meta. Boba Fett Damiot, which I always thought the deck was quite strong, and a couple of Han Solo was the race, an amazing leader, but unfortunately extremely poorly positioned in the meta, simply because there's just so many people running Tak in town. Tak in town is just a hard counter to what Han Solo is trying to do, the Han Solo of Shadow of the Galaxy is trying to do, and yeah, so overall, pretty much what I was expecting, maybe a little bit more aggro, than maybe less mid-range, a bit more aggro was kind of close to my expectations. But overall, a meta that was extremely favorable to what I was trying to do. So yeah, one of the most diverse meta we've ever seen, even including a Spark of Rebellion, which was considered to be quite a diverse meta. So for anybody who were doubting that Boba ban would solve problems, well, you get your answer right now. Boba ban is having some amazing, great impact on the game, simply because people are, it opens up so many places of different mid-range deck that can be played. Obviously set 3 helping out a little bit with that as well. And I think that it's overall an extremely positive for the game. Sabine did not take over the meta as some people were saying, and it is not a surprise to me. Sabine is, yes, a stronger deck, but also a deck that is very counterable. So moving on, Blue-White was heavily represented but failed to perform over. I don't know if people simply haven't found the right build, or it's simply because a lot of kind of casual player was running Blue-White. It's not only about the deck, sometimes it's whoever is piloting it. If the best players are not running Blue-White and all the like kind of more casual, more occasional players are running Blue-White, this can kind of skew the stats against the mid-range decks. So Blue-White mid-range heavily represented but failed to perform. We'll see how it evolves in the future. Then Django and Sabine performed despite adversity. So basically, everybody knew that Django and Sabine were going to see a heavy amount of play coming into this meta. So everybody was extremely well prepared to beat those 2 decks without being even. But despite that, Django and Sabine still doing some solid performances, both seeing a good amount of play and achieving relatively high win percentage. So Django Sabines are not easy to counter. They're deck that are definitely going to be here to stay in the meta. They're not going to go anywhere for sure, and you're still going to see a heavy amount of those decks in the future tournaments. And then finally, Cad Bane did very well with the highest win percentage, and seeing also quite a bit of play. Cad Bane Red, definitely a force to be reckoned with in the upcoming meta, even though I think that it struggles quite a bit against Control, and also as is not so great against Django. And I'm afraid that those 2 big weaknesses might cause the deck to struggle in the future. We'll see how it goes, and I really would like Cad Bane to be a force to be reckoned with in the meta. Now let's talk about the top 8 in a bit more details. So first of all, we got the list of Danielle, who is running a very interesting Sabine Yellow list. So Sabine Yellow is kind of all over the place right now. There's tons of different ways to build a deck. There was simply just a lot of great cards brought in the cunning heroism aspects for Sabine, which means that there's now just a million different ways of building the deck and nobody really knows how to build it. We're talking about Sabine Yellow, of course. This time we're going for a deck that is very low to the ground with a lot of units and no 4 cards I believe in for this specific deck. The deck is really based on having those very sticky 2-drops, Crafty Smugglers and 337s, hard to remove threats, that are really good in a meta that is filled with Tarkin Town and stuff like this. So usually having a 2-drop that cannot just being dealt with by Tarkin Town is just very valuable. And then of course we got the traditional Fleet Lieutenants. As you can see, the build is not really based on the rebels that much, so we're not running wing leaders, and we're still playing the Fleet Lieutenant simply because there's still a few rebels in the deck, obviously. And Fleet Lieutenants into Sneak Attack is a very strong combo. You can just play Sneak Attack to play your Fleet Lieutenants for 2 resources, gets himself the buff and attack right away, so you can basically deal 5 damage out of nowhere. So it's kind of like a better version of 4 cards, I believe in, but it does require a 2-card combo. So the deck, even though it's not playing 4 cards, I believe it has plenty out of hand damage with the Fleet Lieutenant Sneak Attack combo, the Daring Raids, the Million Falcons, and the Cassian that can come into play ready with a Surprise Strike can really deal tons of damage, and obviously the K2SO can always deal out of hand damage as well. So deck's just a very, very well built, very tight, very, very consistent, as you have so many 2-drops and 3-drops. And also seeing the Sabine Wren, this is pretty much the only card that I'm not a massive fan of. Yes, it's a 4-drop that cannot really be killed right away, so it's certainly very strong in some matchup, but I found the card to be a little bit too specialized. Other than this, the deck is just extremely solid, and it's no wonder why Daniel went so far in this tournament, also an excellent player as well. So you get the sideboard here, we got the clear the fields here, probably for the aggro mirror, the Fang Fighters against the control decks, the Kitsu Onyu as well is an interesting inclusion for the control matchup as well, to remove all those upgrades, those bounties and stuff, not only boss control, and a lonely copy of Wing Leader for certain, maybe the aggro decks who can't easily deal with 5 health units on turn 2. So the record for Daniel, that he basically went into 7-1 into the Swiss, only losing to Matt Guyver, who is the Bosk Green expert. So actually the Bosk that Daniel encountered were both Bosk Green, if you wondered. And then as you can see, basically 3 wins against Django, against player who did very well with Django, so 6-2, Thomason's on 6-2, Sam on 6-2, so you can see the deck is doing quite well against Django despite being an aggro deck, but I think it's because the deck is not so much relying on those very large units like Poe and Wreckers, or even like a Sabine with a Darksaber. Those very large units are very easy to tap down. Sabine Yellow seems to just do better against Django, as it has access to those kind of smaller units that can attack right away as they deploy, like for example with the Sneak Attack, which does make it a little bit more difficult to deal with for Django's ability. And then obviously when it comes to the race, the ground units always have better stat than space units, so it has an advantage as well here. So very cool that he's able to pull all this performance here. He lost to me in the top 8. It was actually much closer than I was expecting, because his deck is not well equipped to deal against control at all. I don't think Daniel had Bosk control on his radar when he built his deck, and it just simply, he has no way to stop double heal coming from a client, or even from the bounties if I just play around the Fang Fighters, which I did a good job at doing. So you can just double redeem on his heal, which means that I was just healing too much for him to outrace me, and then I was just able to keep control of the game. Also has very few answers to, I had to really spend a tremendous amount of resource to deal with my Child Send. But to be fair, he did a pretty good job. He managed to take the first game out of me despite the adversity. So a solid deck, to say the least, and I'm sure that he can improve this matchup with a bit more sideboard cards dedicated to it. Moving on, we got the list of Oliver, who is actually a kind of a permanent part of the Nexus podcast, so I really encourage you to check it out. He's an excellent UK player who regularly pull out performances in the different UK tournaments, and this time he brought Cadbane Red, which I think is a very solid deck. It has a lot of great addition from the new expansion, and also benefits a lot from the ban of Boba. And I think he's also a deck that was very well positioned into the meta. just destroys all the mid-range deck, and there were like a lot of mid-range deck in this tournament. So his deck is pretty much what you would expect from a Cad Bane mid-range. We got those early game Underworld units in order to get the ping of Cad Bane and get an early attacking turn, take over the game. Then we got some pretty solid like ambush units. Ambush is a little bit on an awkward place against Django. Ambush is very strong in combination with Cad Bane, but as you can see, the deck is not super well prepared to deal with. Django doesn't have a lot of space units, so it must have been a little bit a bit difficult. We also see some Bamboozle, which is a very surprising inclusion here, but it is a trick that can be fetched from Jabba the Hutt. We're seeing the Jabba the Hutt, now there's 2 of them combo, which is really cool. And of course the Cad Bane. If you can get to 7 and play Cad Bane, you can completely stabilize the Grand Arena, and there's not much Django can do about it. Cad Bane is one of the greatest counter to Django actually, because it comes into play just a very good answer to Ruthless Raiders that allow you to capture the Ruthless Raider without triggering the when defeated ability. And there's just not that many ways. If the Talking Town has already been used, which is likely to be the case, there's just not many answers to Cad Bane. The only question is, can you survive up to that point? So I'm wondering if he maybe he could kind of build his version to be a little bit better against Django, maybe playing a little bit more removal, as he does have in the sideboard here a couple of Daring Raids, maybe Relentless Pursuit. I wonder if playing more Relentless Pursuit would make sense in this deck. Who protects your unit against Talking Town by giving them a shield, and it allows you to easily kind of capture enemy units. And at that point, you can even think about whether you should be playing stuff like I forgot the name, but the FF7 that can free units. But regardless, I think the deck can be modified in order to improve its matchup against Django. The only question is, can it beat Control? And the answer is no. I think this deck has huge problem against Control. I think Control is going to be a difficult matchup for this deck. It does have, of course, the Bazine and the Lesser Raider, but you are typically in that case where you're not really fast enough to beat the Control deck before it goes online. And when it does goes online, you don't really have the resilience to kind of fight it. And outside of Ruthless Raiders, there's just not that many cards that are... After the Bazine and Ruthless Raiders, there's just not that many cards that are really strong against Control here. It's a winnable matchup, and I almost lost to David Holland to his Cad Bane Red, but it is a difficult matchup for sure. So as you can see here, he had a pretty smooth sailing, a lot of good matchups for him. He did lose to Yosera, so George for people who know him, also known as Yosera. With his Emperor Palpatine Yellow, he lost it in the Swiss and in the top cut as well. This is not a good matchup for Cad Bane. It's just simply too much late game going on in that Palpatine's deck. Very difficult. Like, I think Cad Bane needs a very specific meta to work. It does well against aggro, it does well against mid range, but then anything bigger than that, it starts to struggle a lot. Then moving on, we got the list of Mikolai, who also known as SIP. We've probably heard many times, double winners of Take the Initiative. In my opinion, one of the best Polish player, and Polish has a very active Star Wars Limited community, also part of my testing group, and a good friend of mine, and which I playtest actively during preparing for this tournament. He was running Django Red, which is basically his own version. He's also part of one of the Swoop Racers, who have an amazing YouTube channels. If you are interested in more content for competitive Star Wars Limited, you should check it out. Those two players are simply just extremely good at the game, to say the least, and also very innovative deck builders as well. So in this case, not so innovative. They just brought the Django Red, but they have their own spin on the deck. They were basically playtesting the deck for a long time, even before the Boba ban. So they were very aware of the strength of this new leader. So his version, as you can see, is pretty much very aggressive. It gets all the one drops. And it has also the Confederate Tri-Fighters, which I think this is a really strong card against Control. So yes, you can defeat the unit and then heal with Vigilance, which is the main healing card, but it's still like a massive inconvenience, especially on the top target versus client. Is a very good answer to the client. and top target. So it's not doesn't quite work against vigilance, but against top target, it's just a very annoying to play around. So if you wonder why he bring the Scouts, we're probably the Interceptor for the mirror match. Of course the heavy Procedure tank, which happens to be really, really strong in this deck. The swoop down, we can really take people by surprise. And in the sideboard, this was a sideboard that was almost entirely dedicated to beating control, as you can see. The Swoop Racers, Betons, and SIP, we playtested heavily Bosk versus Django Red. And it turns out that they managed to really... this matchup is normally very bad for Django, but they've really made some interesting adjustment to the deck in order to beat control, and I think those adjustments work pretty well. So in this matchup, they pretty much side in everything except the Interceptor. Change of Heart can really be strong if you play the right time. The Comforter Tri-Fighter, more Comforter Tri-Fighter is just annoying to play around, and obviously the Fang Fighters to remove the bounties. Not only that, he also brought 3 copies of Emperor Palpatine, which might be a surprise to a lot of people. But this card is actually very, very strong in his control, because one of the main way Bosk wants to seal the deal against Django is to play a Snoke. And Emperor Palpatine, of course, is a great answer to Snoke. Put out a huge threat on the board as well as get rid of Snoke in the same action is just pretty backbreaking, especially when you've been under a lot of pressure by multiple Bloodthirst Raiders and Fire Sprays. So yeah, I feel like after sideboard, the matchup is pretty close to a 50-50 thanks to those adjustments. So if you're looking for a Django Red list that can beat Heart Control, I advise you to try this out. Sorry, just realized that sorry about that. Looks like the top banner was a little bit too low. Moving on, we're with this matchup. So in this matchup, as you can see, we got he basically lost to a Mandalorian deck in the first round. So yeah, that sometimes happens. You can lose to random decks, especially when you don't know what they're playing, and if they're a bit lucky as well. This can like really happen to anybody, to be fair. And then went all the way up to a massive recovery here with 7 wins in a row, and loses to in top 8 against Howard Williams and his Emperor's Palpatine. Great recovery from him. Like, you need a lot of mental fortitude to be able to get back after such an early loss, especially against a deck like that. And his loss to Howard Williams, very unlucky for Sip, in my opinion. This should be a very easy matchup for him, and things didn't go his way at all in this best of 3, which put him into an early exit to the top 8, unfortunately. Moving on, we got the list of You Can Call Me Al, also, so Alessandro to his real name, a player that has won TTI relatively recently in set 2, a Sabine Green expert, in my opinion, the best Sabine Green players I've ever had the chance to play against, so one of the best, easily the best Sabine Green player in the world, in my opinion, at least from what I've experienced. And he's just really good at this deck. Basically playing against Al and his Sabine Green feels like you're playing against someone who's cheating at the game, to be fair. Like, he's just always have the greatest line of plays, and he just he spends a fair bit of time to find them, but he never fails to find the best lines. And those extra, just being extra good at this deck really helps out a lot for him. So what can we say about this deck? So basically the idea of Al, which also is part of my playtesting group, and one of the person I playtest against the most preparing into this tournament, he also was the only player that was undefeated in day 1 with an 8-0 record. So basically the idea of his deck is very simple. He wants us to play the Sabine Green and just modify the deck to even the odds against Django. So normally Django is a pretty good matchup against Sabine Green, mostly because ECL is not really useful against Django. Like, ECL is just large units. To fight with something on the ground is just not that good. And not only that, he also there's just a lot of large units like Sabine with Darksabers, Bow, and Wreckers, which just can easily get tapped down by Django. And when it happens, it's such a massive tempo swing in favor of Django. So those are basically the reason why the matchup is traditionally pretty bad. But Sabine made some, Al made some pretty interesting changes to his deck in order to accommodate that. So he's playing a lot of early units like the R2D2s, which are like difficult. You don't lose so much value when they get tapped down because they're very small. They have high health, which means that they fare pretty well against those kind of like ping stuff. And it also has access to, he also plays two very interesting cards, so Bright Hope and Admiral Yularen. So the idea of Yularen is to just boost the health of all of your units. And it turns out that whenever you are basically increasing the health of all of your units, all the damage all the damage events, whether you talk about the P38, the daring raid and all that stuff, it becomes a lot more difficult to actually kill your units. So it actually messes up with the math of a lot of the stuff, and suddenly your Sabine doesn't die to a false joke. Like there's a lot of little things like this which adds up together, and Yularen himself is a 2-1 restore, which is very good in the aggro mirror. So Yularen was kind of like a great find from Al to kind of like improve the matchup against Django. In my opinion, Yularen is the best green-white card in the set, and obviously playing the Bright Hope is huge. 2-6 is an excellent stat line to deal with Django, especially when the health is boosted by Yularen, then you have to deal with a 2-7. That is just very difficult to deal with. Can even be improved further with the Metal Ceremony. So a lot of great Rebel Assault and Metal Ceremonies are the full package of both of them, because it really strongly improves the matchups in the mirror of aggro. So really the deck was really built to build Django without compromising too much on the other matchup, because it still plays the fundamentals of what made Sabine Green so powerful. On top of this, you can see the deck is entirely made of heroism card, which means that the 4 cards, I believe in, always deal 4 damage in his deck, which is really, really, really cool. The timely interventions were in the sideboard because timely interventions form like super grindy matchups, and obviously meta was very aggro, so he was not expecting a lot of grindy matchup, making timely reinforcement worse. Fighter for Freedom, probably for the Saboteurs, and kind of he had to make some sacrifices to have the Yularens in the main deck. Darksaber is just very poorly positioned against Django, so having them in the sideboard made a lot more sense, probably for the aggro mirror, or simply decks who don't have a lot of answers to Darksabers. And finally, the U-Wing reinforcement for the very grindy matchups, which the control, the soft control, the out control, and the mid-range decks. Moving on, so his record, undefeated day 1, the only players who defeated and lost to Django in top 8. He won against Dave actually in Swiss and lost against it. So it really is a 50-50 matchup. It is definitely, Django was definitely going to be a difficult point for Sabine Green in this meta. But Al, being the great player that he is and making the adjustment that he made, managed to actually win against three Djangos during the Swiss, and he also won versus both Howard and Joshua in the Swiss and the Emperor Palpatine. So it was kind of lucky pairings for him in the end. Managed to get those easy matchups, which basically put him in a position of undefeated day 1, which is obviously extremely impressive. Moving on into our top 4, we got first the list of Dave, which is the kind of like a different take on the Django deck, a bit closer to what the K2OD has been putting out, using the flamethrowers to get like multiple tappings, some kind of in those kind of cool situation, more reliant on the kind of crafty smugglers, kind of more sticky threats in the early stage of the game. Yeah, it is the Django that we know and love. It is very much the classic kind of textbooks that we've been seeing. And playing the Daring Raids as well. Daring Raids has been of a debate on whether Daring Raid is good. The Swoop Racers, for example, don't like Daring Raids in Django. Daring Raid has the advantage of being a card that can be quite good in the mirror because there's so many 2 health units, and it also can be used to finish off the opponent's attack and dealing damage to it. As you can see, the deck is not particularly well. One of the big difference here with Dave is like his deck is not particularly well prepared for the control matchup as opposed to the Super Racers version. So I think if I was going to go to a tournament bringing Django Red, I would much rather have a version that can beat our control rather than this. With that being said, Dave is actually the only player I lost against during the Swiss and during the entire tournament, for that matter. Despite his deck not being particularly well geared to fight control. I think this Alas, it was kind of like things went very, very wrong for me. I just simply didn't find the right cards. I think that if we played way more games, I think I would be able to come on top most of the time. But yeah, things went very wrong for me on that best of 3, and it'll be just meaning winning, and of course Dave played very, very well. Moving on, so as you can see here, it was the only 6-2 player who managed to make it to a top 8, losing to Sabine, against Al, actually, playing the Sabine, and another Django in the mirror match against Sam. And he lost in top 4 to Howard Williams, which, once again, miraculously pulling out wins with the Palpatine blue. I think here the game went very, very wrong for Dave. I think the matchup is very favorable for Django. I think the games went really, really poorly for him. And also there was this controversy where he pulled out his sideball plan at the middle of between game 1 and game 2, which is not allowed by the rules. And this means, so basically what happened in that is that he didn't get a game loss for that, which would have been very anticlimactic because he would have ended the matchup, the game right away. The judge didn't have any guidelines from FFG on what to do in this situation, so they've used their brain and they said, well, we're just gonna make it so you can keep playing, but you're not allowed to sideboard any cards, so you don't get any unfair advantage with your sideboard plan. And I think this was the sensible thing to do. Great judging here from OPE, and I think this was absolutely 100% the right call, because I think a game loss would have been a little bit rough on this for something like that, and because realistically it's not like that big of an advantage. Like, you just got to remember what card. Like, it's unlikely that you would have messed up on that, but it is not allowed by the rules, so it's good that they've applied something like this. So he was not allowed to sideboard. Definitely was a disadvantage for him, because siding his Bazine would have been a pretty big deal. But yeah, things went very wrong for him. Was a little bit tilted by this situation as well. This could have affected his psyche, and Howard Williams taking the win on this top 4. Moving on to the final. Moving on, we got the list of Joshua, also known as Yulsera, which in my opinion is the best player in the UK. He's one of the most innovative deck builder that you could find, on top of being an absolutely amazing player. This is such a great combo to be such a great innovative players and a great pilot as well. He's the one who cracked the code of the ultimate Boba Green deck, and this is the Boba Green deck that probably provoked the ban of Boba. Like, I don't know if it is. There's a world where Boba would not have been banned if Yulsera did not find that crazy mid-range build where you're playing 3 copies of Vaders and Maul in the same deck, where you completely give up on the tempo plan and go for a value Boba deck. And this time he's bringing the same color combination with the same style of deck, a very kind of value-oriented Palpatine deck, that is able to control the game, but also put on the aggression and just infinite amount of values. So many 2-for-1, so many cards that leave something behind when they die. Kind of also separatist early game plan with the Commando making a good use to the new cards of the separatists with the Confederate Couriers, Poggle the Lessers in the state of the game. And then the later stage of the game is what you can expect with Palpatine, with the same good old change of heart. One of the main reasons to play Palpatine yellow is just this combo between Chancellor's Palpatine, change of heart and Palpatine. You change of heart something, you take control of it, and then you're sacrificing using Palpatine's ability. Very, very powerful combo. Tons of value, tons of powerful late game. Obviously, the deck is very weak to aggro, so obviously, I would not have advised anybody to bring a Palpatine deck in this tournament, because aggro was going to be everywhere, and I would have been shocked. And you see, even the sideboard is not concerned with aggro at all. Like, his sideboard is entirely dedicated to beating control with the Bounty Hunter Kurus, the Conspiracy, the Palpatine's Baton, completely disregarding the control matchup. He does have 55 cards in his deck, as he always does. I'm not going to get into this, we already talked about it, but it is obviously not a good idea, and all the Boba Green moving forward after his build were running 50 cards, and they were better off running 50 cards. But it doesn't take anything away from the fact that he's a great deck builder, and he's obviously one of the best player in the game. And his deck is very, very powerful, even though obviously 55 cards will affect his consistency, as there's always in every single matchup, there's always like a best card in your deck, and having less chance to find the resupply, having less chance to find the barrage, having less chance to find those key cards can be a pretty big deal, especially against aggro when games tend to be shorter. But you know, just like every great player, he's quite lucky, and as you can see on these pairings, he didn't face any aggro decks up to the point where he faced Al in the last round of Swiss. So I don't think Josh would have done as well if he would have met more good Sabine players or good Django players. So this has to be taken into account. Bringing Palpatine 1 in a set in a matchup. Palpatine, in my opinion, is one of the strongest leader is the strongest leader in the game in a world where aggro does not exist. But obviously aggro does exist, and bringing Palpatine 1 in a tournament where aggro is expecting to see heavy amount of play is like playing the Russian roulette. It's very, very risky. It is something I would not advise to a great player like Josh, because I think he's such a good player that he doesn't need to be taking that kind of risk to win tournaments, but he did, and he paid off pretty well for him because he got pretty fortunate pairings, to say the least. Ended up losing to me in the final, so this was a pretty interesting game, to say the least. We ended up, as expected in this matchup, we ended up going to time. This is a miracle, let's be honest. It's a miracle on multiple things. The matchup is extremely disfavorable for me, especially after sideboard. But obviously, the fact that he's basically sided his entire sideboard into his main deck, running 65 cards to get less chance of being milled, mean that he also didn't have the consistency of finding always the right card in the right moment. And I've managed to basically kind of like put pressure on him, aggro him out to a point where he was so unhealthy that anything that was playing was just a huge threat. So basically, I kind of play aggro as Bosk Blue, which is kind of crazy, and ended up taking game 2. And then on game 3, we only had 6 minutes to finish that game. So we obviously sided out all of our late game cards, sided in loads of early game cards with healing. And in this little game where the first two, who has the most damage at the end of the round wins, I had the advantage because I have a leader that deploys on 5. He basically doesn't have a leader. And I have loads of way to heal. I just need to find a threat, and I did find a threat. Client's just a great threat because it's hard to get rid of him for him. So at this little game, this kind of like different style of Stars Limited that we were kind of forced to be into, I had a huge advantage, and I took advantage of this, and I managed to take an unexpected win. I had going into this matchup, especially against a player of that caliber, I had no idea if I could have won that. Like for me, this was crazy. Was not expecting to win at all this matchup. It was just a great game. It made this matchup like very exciting. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was pretty cool in my opinion. Moving on to the finalists, we have the list of Howard Williams running once again is Palp Blue, and for the second time in a row making it to the final to a major tournament. Just as testimony on how good this player is. Once again, just like Josh's deck, an extremely greedy deck. Yes, he has healing, but he's very little early game. Pretty much nothing beating the 3, and there's a massive jump in the curve between 3 and 7, which is basically, so that means he has to ramp. He has no other chance but to ramp. I mean, he has removal, granted, but he has to ramp. His deck doesn't even play barrage, which is not a surprise because he doesn't have that many high. All of his units are very low attack, so barrage is simply just not that great of a card in his deck, which is kind of crazy to say. And it's just an extremely kind of slow and powerful control deck that will beat anything that is not aggro. Like, this deck is really crazy. He also has also some interesting sideboard card with the clone, which I'm still not a big fan of. Also the Rival's Fall, which is interesting. I was not expecting Rival's Fall to... I don't think Rival's Fall is a particularly good card in this meta. There's just not that many expensive leaders that you're happy to kill with it. Not really any equipments that people are running into their leaders to make Rival's Fall particularly good. So not exactly sure. The only basically reason to play Rival's Fall is to get rid of Sabine with Darksaber, but even that comes into a little bit too late to the party most of the time. So yeah, but it actually happened to be pretty strong against me if you saw the final. So yeah, his deck is extremely greedy. As you can see, same story as with Josh. He has not encountered a single aggro deck up to the point where he met Al in round 7 and lost to his Sabine. Once again, that's very fortunate because there's no way, I don't think he would have gone to that if he would have met multiple Jack Django and Sabine. And just as I say that, managed to pull miraculous wins versus Django against Sip and Dave. In my opinion, those wins are not representative of the matchup at all. I think he got very, very fortunate. I think it was a very, very unfortunate SIP. I mean, I know he told me what happened and it was kind of crazy, to be fair. So I don't think this is representative of the matchup. But you know what? To win tournaments, you need to pull up, like, you need to be a great player, you need to have a great deck, and you need to sometimes have a little bit of luck to get where you want to be. Nobody has ever won a tournament without being lucky. Never anybody has ever been to a final without being a little bit lucky. And I speak for myself when I say that. And he goes into the final against me with Bosk into, once again, another crazy, crazy best of 3. This matchup is pretty much just all about just vigilance. I thought I had the advantage in post board because I had a restock in my deck and he didn't. But he got some pretty sick vigilance, milling out 2 of my vigilances, and from that point it was impossible to win. On game 2, I managed to put a pretty decent amount of pressure on him, dealing a lot of damage to him, putting him a little bit on the back foot. And basically then, at that point, I also happened to be fortunate. I drew all 3 of my vigilances and my restock naturally, and from that point it was easy for me to pilot the game and force him to be on the back foot. And just waited for. I think I had a pretty great game, to be fair. I feel like I played very well on that particular game, where I really kind of was waiting for him to restock to mill him out, and things went very well. And then the last game, similar situation as we were against Josh in the previous round. We're 15 minutes left on the round, and we have to play that final game. But once again, the situation is a bit different because we have 15 minutes left on the clock instead of 6, so we're definitely going to get into the late game, and then the situation here is whoever has the most damage on the base wins. But in case both players have no damage on their base, then what happens is whoever has the initiative actually wins the game. That's the other tiebreaker. So the judges did a very good job at informing us about that rule before we started, so we knew how to pilot the matchup. Even though obviously nobody is prepared for that kind of situation, it was a crazy, crazy circumstances. Nobody's prepared for this, so it's all about your game instinct. It's all about. We also, of course, pretty exhausted at this point because we've played a full tap 4 of very, very long games. So it was kind of like just your instinct and playing quickly. We were also constantly under pressure by the judge to play as fast as possible. So you don't see that when you're watching the game, but we are constantly being pressured by the judges to play as quickly as we can. And at that moment, we end up in that checkmate situation where there's no damage on the base, but he has the initiative, but I happen to have a Gar Saxon Gauntlet into play, which is a card I haven't actually played a single time in this entire tournament because it's a one-off as a sideboard card. And I happen to have this card because I just wanted more threats. I was like, okay, I'm going to bring this to have more threats. And this is on the board at that time. And at that time, it is checkmate because Howard has only 2 options. He only can either keep the initiative, in which case I just attack with Gar Saxon, deal damage to his base and win the game, or he can just kill the gauntlet, but then I would just take initiative and win the game, which is what happened. And I ended up winning the entire tournament from that little interaction. A huge, what of unexpected. So this matchup is definitely more balanced than the one against Josh. Josh was really much like a very disfavorable matchup. This one was very much like kind of a very balanced. We both have weapons against each other. He has more threat, I have more removal, and then it's all about the mill, all about the being able to mill out the opponent. I think the Cray Dragons really help out in sideboard after that matchup, but then this last game was just a one of a million game. In my opinion, an historical moment in Star Wars Unlimited because, as I said, for such a big tournament, and also because of this unique interaction, this unique kind of tiebreaker rules, which happen to be very relevant in this particular game. So what an epic way to finish the matchup. Some people were a little bit kind of bummed out by the way it finishes. I personally found this finish to be more interesting than a traditional mirror of mirror where it's a mirror of control, where it's just all about just vigilance your opponent and hope you get some good meal. So for me, that ending was more interesting and epic than what normally happens. So for me, it was a positive, but a lot of people didn't feel that way. We'll talk a bit more about the controversy later on in this video. Then, of course, the Champions deck, my Bossk Blue. So this is a deck that it took me very long to find the right deck. I've tried many decks, and I just couldn't find anything that was able to beat Django and Sabine relatively reliably, while also maintaining a decent game plan against other decks. And Bossk was the answer to all my problems. Also a deck that had played a lot in set 2, so I was very comfortable. So I'm not going to talk about the list at all, because I'm gonna have a dedicated video where I'm gonna go into much more details about how I play, what are the changes I've made to this new list with the new set, and how do I adapt it to the new meta, and what are the different matchups, and how do I pilot those different matchups. So look forward for this video, as I'm gonna be going into much further details about this. Into my run, I have to say that I got pretty much what I was expecting. I got a very diverse different Cat Banes and solo Django. So outside of not playing against Anakin, which I should have played against Anakin considering how many Anakin players, I got some pretty good pairings, but to be fair, I had the right deck for the tournament. So when you look at the metagame breakdown, I have a good matchup versus 90% of the field. So it was just a very good meta for me, because I think I made the right choice in terms of decks. Even the decks that normally can have a good matchup against me just didn't have the sideboards to deal with me. The Cat Banes were not prepared for the control matchup at all. So I took the meta by surprise, which I think explains why I had such a good matchup all along in the tournaments. Happened to lose against Dave's Django's Fets, just the game didn't go my way. And I got lucky enough to get some really good matchup by the end of Swiss, which is really the moment where you really want to have those good matchups, because those are the most important games. And being able to have like double Cat Bane in those last finishes. Obviously, David Holland's a great player, but that also a mate who I tested with, but the matchup was just not favorable for him. But he still put up a hell of a fight despite that. And also in round 1, I actually almost lost, because my opponent went TIE Phantoms turn 2, no answer. I lost game 1 like that, and my opponent went on game 2 with TIE Phantom turn 2, TIE Phantom turn 3, TIE Phantom turn 4, and I answered the first TIE Phantoms, but then the 2 remaining TIE Phantoms kind of left in there, and I was like, kind of looking up the sky, and I think, is that really going to be my round 1 loss, just getting cheesed out by TIE Phantoms? But it turns out that I managed to get enough healing from the top targets, and then managed to get myself into a Snoke to stabilize the board and managed to bring the win back. So I would have been very disappointed to win such a favorable matchup. He was playing Cad Green, which is very much an easy matchup, should be at least. Another interesting things about, so yeah, I was fortunate to not meet any Howard or Joshua into the Swiss, because without these special rules, this would have been much tougher, especially against Yosera. I would have probably lost against Yosera in the Swiss. If we'd have met him, Howard Williams would have been a lot more closer. Maybe could be a draw. It's whoever wins the game 1 wins the game, so that would have been a lot closer. But yeah, overall, very happy with my tournament performances. I think that I really deserve the top 4 at the very least with the deck I've made, and then the rest is history. Just watch the game; they were on stream. It's just wild stuff, and I think, to pat myself on the back a little bit, I think I did a good job at navigating those very unique situations. I think I played exactly how I was supposed to in those crazy games where it was just like whoever has the most damage on base wins, that kind of thing. I've managed to navigate those very unique situations very well, despite not being prepared at all for those. So I'm gonna give myself a little bit of credit, despite obviously favorable circumstances. But as I said, nobody has ever won a tournament without being unlucky, and I've been on the other hand so many times. So many times I've been in those situations where I have the right deck, I have the right training, I have the right everything, but I just happens to be facing too many bad matchups, and just that's the end of it. And for once things went my way, and I'm super happy to pulling out my first win on the major tournaments. I won multiple tournaments, but never tournaments that were bigger than just a 30 or 40 people tournaments. Here was like 200 people tournaments. I also won TTI, but this is once again a bit of a different piece of cake. But here was really happy to be able to take the win on the big pill. I was not expecting it at all. My objective was I was expecting top 16. I was hoping for at least the top 16, and I would be happy, of course, with the top 8. And when I saw the matchup, I saw, okay, after day 2, I was like, yeah, my round 1 is against Sabine. I should be able to pull top 4 at the very least, and then anything beyond top 4 was just a bonus. That's why I was not stressed at all during those different games. Yulsera and Howards are players who are used to be in top 8s very often. So for them, they're really looking for the win. Me, I was really happy to be in top 4 already. So for me, I was playing those games maybe less stressed than they were, maybe less yeah, whatever happens is just positive for me at this point. So I just want to talk about a few decks that caught my eye and did quite well in the tournaments. First one is a deck from Holy Call, who went into a 6-2 records with this Quinlan Green. So Quinlan Green, but vastly differently built. That I've seen a lot of people playing Quinlan Green, but playing in order to take advantage of the General's Blade. You put General's Blade, and you get ramp into. Oh, never mind. He does play General's Blade. Yeah, that's basically the point of this deck is you put a General's Blade on an early Jedi, either Ahsoka or Huang, and then you get to ramp into those kind of massive cards. So it's kind of just a value yellow, white, green decks that we've seen before as the hand green, or with the or even with the boba yellow, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like things we've seen before, but it's kind of a different spin on it because it plays Quinlan's with this kind of General's Blades interaction, which I think is very cool. It's a very cool deck, and did very well with it. So definitely something that is worth give it a shot. It's not the first time I see that. I've seen some friends who showed me the similar deck list. And I think this deck looks actually pretty cool on paper. Next we got Kane Harrison, who is running a Yoda blue, and there was actually multiple Yoda blue in this tournament. And his deck is very interesting. So it's sort of like, imagine this kind of like a control mid-range. It's a control deck using units. And for this kind of, again, the Satine Cry's win condition makes a lot of sense, because you're really kind of like, you don't really have a great ability to kill people quickly, but you have the ability to kind of stall the game with a lot of units, and then from that point, Satine Christ can really end games extremely quickly with our melee ability. So definitely one of the decks that I'm the most excited to try out. Also running the Duchess Champions, which I was not even expecting. The card can be quite good if you can get multiple units on board against aggro. The deck seems very well positioned against Sabine at the very least. He has loads of Sentinel units, as well as the Vigilance on 4. Of course, the You're My Only Hope Yoda combo to put in play an early Jedi, early 5/7. Sometimes kind of Bendu if you play this on turn 3. Or even obviously early Obi-Wan can be early Luke Skywalker, early Chewbacca, stuff like this. And obviously Redemption to heal a bunch. And yeah, Redemption, the fact that you can play Redemption early with You're My Only Hope is such a big deal. So it's a very sweet deck. Lots of removal as well, like 2 Rivals Fall, 2 Takedown, 3 Feather Dragons, even playing the Forces with me, which is cool. And even playing the Restock. So he has a real kind of like plan against control. It's a deck that even out of the main deck has a real plan against control. We're seeing Satine, we're seeing Restock, Vigilance at 4. The deck can really win the meal game against a control deck. And also has Kuel, which is just such an amazing card in this deck, just use so many cards. So yeah, this deck is very sweet, and there's a couple of things I would personally change, but this is such a cool deck, so big thumbs up for him. The only thing that I'm a little bit surprised with this deck is the fact that he's running Equalize in the sideboard. For me, Equalize is one of the best card that you could ever play against Django. And the deck is a bit light on space defense. I mean, he does play Conquer Down Interceptor and a fair few amount of removals and a fair few amount of heals, but I would definitely think about running the Equalize in the main deck in the current meta. With that being said, you Equalize, it does play quite a few units, and sometimes Equalize, you can't get the full value of it sometimes, but yeah, it's such a great card. So very, very, also runs the Spark of Rebellion in the sideboard, so really has a plan against hard control, as you can see here. Not the deck I would have been happy to face, so just very well built, and definitely a deck that I think has legs. Moving on, we got Michael Silk, which is a friend of mine, an excellent player who also regularly performs in UK tournaments, and also an excellent deck builder and a great innovator. He innovated a lot with his Lando Calrissian Red in set 2. This time he's bringing us another famous black character from Star Wars. It is Mace Windu. This deck is so incredibly sweet. It's a mid-range deck that really utilizes... It's a mid-range control deck. It's like a soft control deck that runs a tremendous amount of damage, and I think his deck is extremely well built. I think if you want to build a Mace Windu, it's exactly the way you should build it. I don't think you can run hard control Mace Windows because there's simply just no kind of AoE Wrath effect for heroism. I don't think you can run a hard control deck without something like a Super Laser Blast. But he's just playing kind of like, as I said, soft control. And in soft control, those kind of Wrath effects are not as powerful. He's playing a lot of units to block the board. And obviously, his Daring Raids are basically deal 3 damage for 2. His Open Fires is basically deal 6 damage for 4 if he wants them to, thanks to Mace Windu, which is crazy good. Also plays like the Bombing Run plus Mace Windu deployment. It's very strong. Runs a lot of, as you can see, his deck is very built to beat Django. We're looking at Concordat Interceptors, Razor Crest, Obi-Wans, Alter Sprites, Redemption, tons of like space unit that can really be a pain for Mace Windu to deal with. For Django to deal with. Loads of removal that can kill those units. And has a solid amount of answers against, thanks to all of his space units and the 2 Perilous position, he also has a solid amount of answers against TIE Phantom. So a deck that is very well built for the meta, very well prepared for Django meta, and with some solid sideboard option as well. So just a very, very well built deck. Something that, I forgot to mention, but there's in this list and also in the Yoda list, 3 copies of Arc 170s, which have not been included into this because there's a bug on. So this Mace Windu deck has loads of space units, and you can see Yoda also should have more Arc 170s, so a bit more space than it looks on paper here. So just take this into account. So this is just a great build, and I think if you are going to try to play Mace Windu, definitely going to be wanting to try something like this. It's such a cool deck. Is this better than what a Yoda deck could be? Not necessarily. It's something that is going to be interesting. Is like, even though the deck makes a lot of sense, I wonder how useful is Mace Windu's ability in this deck, and if it's not, then maybe pivoting towards a similar build but using Yoda Red instead of Mace Windu Blue could make more sense. It is something that is worth a try regardless. Next, we have Tiebreaker controversy. We'll talk a little bit about the Tiebreaker controversy and what happened in those games. So if I've already talked a little bit earlier about that. And the first thing is a lot of people were pretty frustrated by the Tiebreaker rules. The fact that Tiebreaker rules was basically based on whoever gets the initiative tokens at the end, and also the fact that is whoever most health on the base. And I personally think that Tiebreaker rules are important because otherwise you can't just make a game with unlimited time. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is, especially in top 8 in high level tournaments, if you give players unlimited enough time to play, they will take unlimited amount of time to play. So if players have no incentive to play fast, they will play very, very slowly. It sucks for the viewers because it means that every play takes forever, and it sucks for the casters. It also really sucks for the casters. Like it sucks for everybody pretty much. Even us as players, like we don't necessarily want to play games that last forever. Like it's just not very fun at all. But obviously, when there's so much on the line, we're going to take every possible minute we can in order to make the best possible play. And we can so obviously you can always have a judge that can enforce like, oh yeah, can you play a little bit faster? But you're still going to have a considerably longer time if there's no other incentive to play fast. You still players are still going to take a screen amount of time in order to play. The second reason is like player wants to go home. We don't want, like, we've been playing for like 9 rounds day one. I had a flight to take on Saturday afternoon. I knew the tournament was going to be over by about 3 to 4 o'clock. So I had a flight to take at 6. So I don't want to be playing forever. I want to go home. I want to catch my flight and go home. So and so it's not good for the players when we have to wait to spend so much time. Think about players who are far away from their home. They probably had to negotiate with their wives in order to take that day off. It makes a huge difference that we can come back around. We can be at home in the evening or even like in the late afternoon for people who live nearby. It just makes a huge difference on our decision of whether to because if we have unlimited time, then suddenly if I want to not miss my flight, I have to take an extra hotel night. I have to take a flight. I have to take my day off on Monday because I have to fly on the Monday morning. Like, it just makes a huge difference for the players. It also makes a huge difference for the organizers because organizers also are employees. They don't want to be working all day during the weekend, being able to wrap everything up and be at home at a reasonable amount of time. That is a huge difference maker for the organizers. So me, I'm not in favor of those crazy unlimited games. A game of Star Wars Unlimited, especially a control mirror that goes all the way to 3 games, can last up to like 2 hours and a half. It's ridiculous. So like, it's really not a good idea in my opinion. My second argument is also is that I find this tiebreak rules, if you know about it and you know how to play around it, it actually makes the game more exciting. I'm sorry, but like a hard control matchup is just not a good matchup. It's just basically just, oh, I have vigilance and hope that I ramp your own vigilance. I find games where we're like, okay, we'll try to deal the most damage as possible to each other. I find those games to be a lot more exciting than just regular things. So I think it was, in my opinion, it's more exciting to have this. But obviously, the caster needs to be aware of that rules. They need to communicate properly to the viewers how this rule works, so then people can really enjoy what's happening on the screen instead of just being like confused. So I think it's a job here on the casters more than on the organizers to kind of make this unique situation a bit more exciting for the viewers. Another thing, so one of the things they could have done is like they could have made the top 4 games happening simultaneously. What they did is they had 2 top 4 going one and then the other instead of having them simultaneously. And if they would have made this going at the same time, they could have made more time, and maybe the final games could have been played in unlimited time with the time that we saved from that. Once again, not a big fan of this because I think that if you're going to be doing this, that means you're going to be casting one less game. Not only that, it also means that so there's one less game that's going to be shown on screen. So would you rather see multiple shorter games or one massive super long games where people take forever to play? My opinion is you would rather just see multiple games instead of seeing one massive one. So I'm not a big fan of that. And another thing as well is that if you really want to squeeze those 2 games and be played simultaneously, then I would be in favor of having a top 16 cut instead of top 8. You don't realize, but in tournament like this where there's 200 players and it's only a top 8 cut, it is incredibly difficult to make it to the top cut because you need to be, it's so punishing. It means that you're going to be 6-2. In my opinion, in a normal tournament, a 6-2 cut should be enough to make you, like a 6-2 cut with a good goal average should be enough to make you top cut. Here, there's only one person who managed to make 6-2 and make it top 8. 7-1 is just so incredibly difficult to achieve in a tournament like this. So I think that a top 16 would be, for a tournament that size, would be more reasonable. And then we would be able to have, so make those 2 games happen simultaneously, the top 4 games, but have a top 16 instead of top 8. I think that's what I would have done personally. But that means obviously that once again, you need to have a reasonable amount of time for each games. That means you need to have the 75-minute rules being enforced, which is, by the way, the official FFG rules. There's nothing OPE did in that tournament that was not approved by FFG. Everything of this is part of the FFG core rules. So something to say is like there needs to be some sort of tiebreaker. I understand that it can feel very awkward for the players, especially if they're not properly informed about how the rules works. But us as players, we were perfectly informed about everything that was going on. Howard and I, as well as Josh and I, in the last game was very clearly communicated to us all the tiebreaker rules works, and we had to play in order consequence. We can even sideboard in consequence of that. And actually we did. We both kind of completely changed our sideboard plans for that third game. So we were both completely well informed about the way the world works. And from that standpoint, once both players are completely aware about how things work, then suddenly it's all about who is able to play the best in those circumstances. So for me, it was a fair game. We both knew the rules. We both tried our best to win, considering the circumstances that we were in. So obviously I won those games, so it's easy for me to say that it's fair game, but I think that from an objective standpoint, we both were playing the similar kind of decks. So it was just fair game, as I said. And in fact, it was so fair that it was extremely close. It was some of the closest games of Star Wars Limited you've probably ever seen in a tournament. So as far as like thinking about possible solutions in order to improve that situation, I was thinking that maybe a chess clock for Top Cut would be a better solution. So maybe a chess clock where and whenever someone runs out, if someone runs out of time, something along the lines of like, every time it's your turn, you basically press the button and you have a set amount of time. So let's say 75 minutes. I mean, we get like 37 minutes per player maybe. And if someone runs out of time on his chess clock, then basically he only has like 2 seconds to make each play. So he's still able to play the game, but he can only has two seconds to make each play, which means that he has to basically play on reflex, pretty much, which is obviously a massive disadvantage. So obviously this is a great incentive for players to play faster, and it doesn't end super anticlimactic, and it's not a perfect solution because you still have those kind of anticlimactic ending where the game is over because someone just ran out of time and just like, so it's not a perfect solution, but it maybe would be something that people would be more happy with. Finally, the learnings of this tournament. What did we learn from this tournament? Number one is Sabine and Jangles are here to stay. Those decks have proven that they are extremely good decks because everybody was against them. Everybody wanted to beat them. And despite that, they still manage some great win rate as well as some great performances. Number two, Control is very well positioned, but will it be the case in the future? This should be a question mark, I'm sorry. Control is very well positioned, as I said. It beats the mid-range deck that are trying to beat Sabine and Django. It has a reasonable matchup against Sabine and Django. And so it's very well positioned. It's just a deck that beats a lot of stuff. But I'm not sure that's going to be the case for the future because it turns out there's just a lot of cards that are really great against Control. We talk about, of course, the Relentless. There were basically no Relentless to be seen on any people's sideboards. There's just so many great like anti-control cards in general in the game, and even set 3 has brought us extra cards that are really good against Control. One of the best examples probably Stella Guerrera. I think Stella Guerrera is absolutely insane against our Control. If you're playing this in a red-white mid-range deck, you can play her to search for a tactic. Pillage is one of those tactics. You get to play it, discard 2 cards, you put a threat on the board at the same time, and then it dies and you can do it again. That's absolutely absurd. So yeah, Stella Guerrera, one of the best anti-hard control cards that this set has brought to the table. I think that people are aware of the threat and will change the sideboard in order to beat it. It's going to be a very, very, very different environment for hard control, I can tell you that much. I think the reason why I won this tournament is because I managed to take the meta by surprise. I don't think many people were expecting Boss Blue, and Boss Blue ended up just taking the win. Moving on, we have Cad Bane. Yeah, Cad Bane is real, guys. Cad Bane is real. Cad Bane will see a lot of plays and had the highest win percentage in the entire tournament. I don't think the deck is necessarily going to perform as well moving forward. I think that especially if Control end up seeing a lot more play, but it is definitely going to be a real deck moving forward. Moving forward, probably the biggest counter performance has been on the side of Han Yellow. Compared to what I was expecting, Han Yellow is just a deck that benefited a lot from the ban, also benefited a lot from set 3, And despite that, Minot has did not perform very well. I think the problem is just the meta is too aggro for Han Yellow right now, but as the meta becomes a bit more controlling, Han Yellow will have something to say in there, because Han Yellow is one of the few decks that is naturally good against hard control without requiring to have like tons of anti-control sideboard cards. Moving on, mid-range heroism still needs tweaking. I don't think mid-range heroism is bad, despite doing pretty bad in this tournament. I just think that it needs to be more tweaked. I also think that very good players need to pick up that deck for it to perform, because it's good to be no matter how good of a deck you are, if people that are the best players in the game don't pick up the deck, it's not going to perform particularly well, and that's something that you always have to be taken into account. Moving on, I just want to talk about the impact of set 3 on the meta. And my thought on this is that I see some people saying, well, set 3 is completely turning this meta upside down. Or like, no, it's not. Let's be honest. The only reason why Django sees play is because Boba is banned. If Boba was not banned, you wouldn't see any Django. I can guarantee you this. I mean, there is a certain matchup where Django is better than Boba. Okay, fine. But 90% of the case, I can tell you that you would rather have Boba than Django. 90% of the matchups. In any case, set 3 is having some impact. Of course, I'm not denying this. There's Anakin, we'll see some Yoda, we'll see. We are seeing some cards that are seeing play, but it's very small impact. Like, you would normally see the set 1, set 2, and set 3 have the same size in terms of amount of cards they're adding to the game. So if those 3 sets were equal in power level, you would see about 33% of cards for set 1, 33% of cards for set 2, and 33% of set 3 in the same deck, within the same deck. That's not what's happening at all. You see more along the line of around like 45% of set 1, something like 30% of, like maybe 50% of set 1 cards, if I'm simplifying, so 50%, 35% of set 2, and then 15% of set 3. So set 3 is significantly weaker than set 2. It's not having as big of an impact on the meta. Most of the legendaries from set 3s are just very niche kind of card that are kind of okay, but they're very niche. They just the set 3 is not having a big impact on the meta. The reason why the meta is more diverse is because Boba has been banned. I mean, obviously, having set 3 being on top of that does help the meta. I'm not denying this, but set 3 is overall not having a huge impact on the meta, especially when you compare it to the impact that set 2 had. Even though it was still not massive, it was definitely more significant. And here, once again, the impact is even smaller, even proportionally to because obviously as we are getting more sets, it's only natural that every added set is going to have less and less impact. But even proportionally, even taking this into account, set 3 is having very small impact. The 2 massive archetypes that were introduced from set 3 did not see any play. So we didn't see any deck that it was coordinate, and any deck that was playing a significant amount of exploit synergies of exploits, like whether you talk about Kondoku or whether you talk about, not Gunray. There's absolutely nothing exploit. There's nothing in this tournament that can be considered to be an exploit deck that had any sort of significance results. So that is something that is a little bit disappointing. Obviously, I would have hoped that on Coordinate, I was very convinced that Coordinate would not have any impact. I was really hoping that someone would find an exploit build. Maybe there's still some exploit deck to be added, but it's a bit disappointing that the 2 major mechanics that were brought by this expansion did not have any sort of impact on competitive play, and I don't think that's a good thing for the game. With that being said, you can rejoice that the meta is great, and as I said, I think Boba ban basically saved this meta. I think if Boba would not have been banned, we would have ended up with the exact same meta as we had in set 2, maybe with just a few more cards, a few things right in there. So yeah, just wanted to have a couple of thoughts on this. Closing thoughts here is a huge thanks to my testing group. I could not have done this without you guys. I have some testing groups, the Soup Racers, some of the players that are well known on the TTI circle, Avastator, like Buku, you can call me Al. and many other guys, Dylan. So basically some of the best players of TTI. I basically playtest with those guys. Those are my playtest, part of my playtest group, some of the best players in Europe. And it showed that again. Top 3 guys from a playtest group. So SIP, me, and Al managing make top 8. Obviously you see Betons here on the left hand side. One of the most innovative deck builders in Star Wars Limited in my opinion. And such great guys, and huge amount of playtest has been done for the preparation for this tournament, and it paid out very well for both me and my co-playtesters. So thank you guys. I couldn't have done it without you. Not everybody in my playtest group is on the picture here, but we just try to catch as many as we could. Moving on, we got also a huge thanks to OPE for organizing such a flawless event. The only criticism that I had in previous OPE was like I found the judging to be a little bit lackluster. This was not the case at all in this tournament. This was not the case at all in this tournament. I thought that the event was just very, very well organized. The venue was spectacular. Everything went smooth sailing. Everything was on time. The judging was great. The prizes are insane and far, far better than what we get from official FFG tournaments. I think that FFG is really need to learn from OPE, in my opinion, in terms of how to run events and also how to give proper pricing. If FFG wants to their OP program to be taken seriously, they need to take it seriously themselves, and OPE is definitely doing that. I found that the price for the PQ is once again are abysmal. They're not even close to what are the expectations, and we've been almost a year that the game has been released now, and we're still not having great price pool from FFG. I mean, I know the World Championship is coming, but you still have to wait until July for this to happen. So that's just way too long, for any significant effort from FFG being done in terms of organized play, and that's a bit disappointing. Moving on here, I'm not sure if I'll go to the Galactic Championship, as my first baby is probably going to be due around that time. I think my baby is due for like the 19th of July and the tournament is on the 26th, 27th. I don't think it is reasonable for me to fly to the Galactic Championship. I'll try to find a way to make it there. I don't know if I will make it there or not, even though I do have a free flight ticket for Las Vegas. Obviously, if my baby in my family is my ultimate priority, it will obviously take over the card game, even though this card game means a lot to me. Little announcement here. If you are excited to get the Clan Saxon Gauntlet that won me the championship, so in this very unique situation where I had this Clan Saxon into play, as well as the initiative token that won me the game, that was used during the game, and I've added my signature as well as my name as my pseudonym on it. So if you're interested in buying this little piece of Star Wars Unlimited history, let me know. Let me know, either make me an offer on Discord or in the comment below. The highest offer will get the card. I will ship the card and the initiative token to them. So make me an offer. I have no idea how much money people can spend for having a little piece of history of the game at home for their collection. So just make me an offer on Discord or in the comments below, and I will take the best offer. Thank you so much for following this video. One of the big motivation for me to play the game, is my YouTube channel, and obviously, I don't know if I would have jumped into this game as seriously if I didn't have your support. So there's a world where I don't do any of this, and maybe I don't get the same motivation to perform and play tournaments. So I also dedicated this tournament win to all my subscribers and people who are supporting me. Thank you so much for supporting me. I also want to do a special thanks to Andy Cameron, who hosted me during that event. I could slip to his place. It's also one of the great benefits of the community. We help each other, try to make traveling to tournaments a little bit easier. And Andy was an amazing host, and also thank you very, very much for that, for what happened here. So let me know what you think about this new meta, what you think about the tournaments in the comments below, and I'll see you next time for another video, probably my in-depth deck tech about my updated version of Bosque Blue. And I'll see you soon. Bye bye.